So I want you to try and imagine an incredibly unlikely cast of characters. We have a brilliantly armored Elizabethan general, a blood-soaked Scottish king, a frontier lawman with a six-shooter, and an anthropoid ape named Waldo sitting in a Bronx zoo cage.
That is quite the lineup.
Right. What could possibly connect all of them? Well, it's the architecture of human ruin.
Yeah. The really dark stuff.
Exactly. Today, we are cracking open this bizarre and honestly beautiful archive to figure out exactly how a good person's conscience gets hijacked. And you might be sitting there thinking, a 400-year-old play has absolutely nothing to do with your life.
Which is what everyone thinks at first.
Yeah, but think about the last time your mind spun a whole narrative out of a misunderstood text message. Or the last time you compromised your own morals just a fraction of an inch to get something you thought you deserved.
We all do it.
We do. And we are broadcasting right now from the archives of Chesterton Radio, looking out the studio window onto quiet Commercial Street in the historic town of Atchison, Kansas, where, great books and conversation actually still matter.
They absolutely do.
Our mission for this deep dive is to explore the collection called Othello versus Macbeth. We are moving way past the standard classroom readings here.
Right, no boring lectures today.
No, we are delving into classic radio drama transcripts. And these range from faithful Shakespearean adaptations to hard-boiled 1940s murder mysteries and, even serialized Wild West comedies.
It's such a treasure trove.
It really is.
Yeah.
We want to know why these two terrifying tragedies remain the ultimate blueprints for the psychology of temptation.
Yeah, and treating this material as an investigation into human vulnerability is vital. Because Shakespeare is not, he's not just writing museum pieces.
Right.
He is writing criminal psychology. I mean, the radio transcripts we are examining, they map out the precise, agonizing coordinates of how a human being dismantles their own soul.
Wow, dismantles their own soul.
Yeah. And by stripping away the visual spectacle of the stage and placing these stories entirely in the audio medium, what they called the theater of the mind, these 20th century radio producers expose the raw nerve of Shakespeare's work.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we have this wildly eclectic list of characters and settings from the radio archives, but the core premise of our sources brings us right back to the two titans, Othello and Macbeth.
The heavy hitters.
Yeah. The Substack article in our materials, it lays out a central thesis about the fundamental difference between the downfalls of these two men. And it begins with the premise that neither man starts as a villain.
And that is the terror of it, really. If they started as monsters, well, we could just dismiss them.
Oh, for sure. It'd be easy.
Right. But Shakespeare demands we look at men of immense stature. I mean, Macbeth is introduced as a heroic, ferociously loyal warrior. In the text, we hear these breathless reports of him fighting for his king, Duncan.
He's literally out there saving the country.
Exactly. The captain describes Macbeth unseeming a rebel from the nave to the chaps. Which is, it's a gruesome image.
Oh, yeah. Slicing a guy from his belly button to his jaw.
Yeah, completely visceral. But in the context of the play, it's celebrated. It is sanctioned righteous violence to save the nation.
He is the undeniable savior of Scotland at that moment. And Othello is cut from a very similar noble cloth. He is a deeply respected Moorish general in the Venetian army.
Very respected.
Yeah, and when Othello is brought before the Senate, accused by his new father-in-law of using witchcraft to seduce and marry Desdemona, he doesn't shout. He doesn't act defensive at all.
No, he's perfectly calm.
He is incredibly dignified and articulate. He just calmly explains that he won her heart by telling her stories of his life, the battles, the sieges, the fortunes he survived. He's a man of honor, and the Senate universally respects him.
Yet, they both completely obliterate their lives. Their marriages, the lives of those they love, just gone.
The essay in our stack proposes a fascinating dichotomy to explain this divergence. It says Macbeth is a tragedy of choosing evil, whereas Othello is a tragedy of believing evil.
Okay, I want to challenge that slightly.
Go for it.
If Macbeth is about choosing evil, let's look at the mechanics of that choice. Because it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It is catalyzed by supernatural temptation.
The witches.
Yes. Macbeth and his friend Banquo, they meet the three weird sisters on a foggy heath. And the witches give him a prophecy. They say, "All hail Macbeth, that shalt be king hereafter."
Right.
They plant a thought. So how is that different from Iago planting a thought in Othello's mind?
Well, the difference lies in the nature of the soil where the seed is planted. Yeah, with Macbeth, the soil is pure ambition. And notice Banquo's reaction to the exact same supernatural encounter. I mean, the witches also promise Banquo that his descendants will be kings.
Yeah, they do. But Banquo just brushes it off. He actively warns Macbeth. He says that the instruments of darkness tell us truth, win us with honest trifles, to betray us in deepest consequence. Banquo recognizes the trap of the half-truth.
So Banquo has a functioning moral compass. He sees the bait. But Macbeth sees the bait too, doesn't he? I mean, he wrestles with his conscience.
He does, yeah.
He sits alone and contemplates the murder of King Duncan. He literally lists the reasons not to do it. He's like, Duncan is my kinsman, my king, and my guest.
It's a massive violation of hospitality.
Right. Macbeth acknowledges that Duncan has been a good, humble leader, and that murdering him would cause tears to drown the wind. He knows it is a mortal sin.
He possesses complete moral clarity. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote extensively about the conscience, and he argued that to act against one's conscience is always a sin because it is a deliberate turning away from what one perceives to be the good.
That makes total sense.
And Macbeth perceives the good perfectly. He knows the damnation he is inviting, yet with the ruthless, kind of emasculating encouragement of Lady Macbeth.
Oh man, she is brutal.
She really is. She famously tells him to screw his courage to the sticking place. And so he consciously overrides his own conscience. He chooses the crown over his soul. He chooses evil.
I was thinking about this, and tell me if this analogy holds up. Is Macbeth essentially like a man who sits down, reads a manual on the catastrophic effects of explosives, and actively decides to build a bomb in his basement to blow up his rival?
Fully aware of the carnage.
Exactly. While Othello is like a man who was tricked into drinking poison because his most trusted friend handed it to him and swore it was medicine.
That analogy captures the mechanics perfectly. Macbeth constructs his own destruction. Othello consumes his, believing he is curing an illness. Macbeth's evil comes from within, magnified by the outside. But Othello's evil is entirely an external infection introduced by Iago.
Wait, but doesn't that analogy risk absolving Othello of his agency?
How so?
Well, if you are tricked into drinking poison, you are just a victim.
Mm-hmm.
But Othello doesn't just harm himself. He violently murders his innocent wife, Desdemona.
That is true.
So he isn't just drinking poison. He is weaponizing it against someone else. How is his choice to act on jealousy fundamentally different or less culpable than Macbeth's choice to act on ambition?
This raises an important question about the nature of a hijacked mind. Othello is not absolved, and the tragedy absolutely does not excuse his actions. But we must look at his motivation.
Oh.
Macbeth kills for personal gain. Othello kills for a warped sense of justice. Iago, the trusted friend in your analogy, doesn't use magic. He uses devastating psychological warfare.
He really knows how to dig in.
He does. He targets Othello's deepest insecurities, his age, his race, his status as a permanent outsider in Venetian society, and weaponizes them. Iago convinces Othello that Desdemona is sleeping with his lieutenant, Cassio.
Right.
So when Othello finally murders Desdemona, he doesn't see it as a murder for personal gain. He frames it as a sacrifice. He actually says, she must die, else she'll betray more men.
He genuinely thinks he is a righteous judge executing a criminal.
Precisely. To borrow again from Aquinas, Othello is operating under an erring conscience. His premise that Desdemona is guilty is a total fabrication, built entirely on the lies of a man he constantly calls honest Iago.
It's so ironic. The ultimate tragedy in both of these stories boils down to the exact same human failing, which is misplaced trust.
Yes, misplaced trust.
Macbeth trusts the cryptic, deceptive prophecies of the Weird Sisters. Othello trusts the whispers of a sociopath. They use the wrong navigational compass. Which downfall is fundamentally more terrifying for you to witness, the man who builds the bomb or the man who drinks the poison?
What's fascinating here is that the terror of both is rooted in the same philosophical battleground. The Substack essay points us toward a profound quote by G.K. Chesterton. He said, "The only defensible war is a war of ideas."
Wow. A war of ideas.
Yeah. Both of these plays are, at their core, internal wars of ideas. The battlefield is the human conscience. Watching Macbeth is terrifying because we witness a man systematically amputate his own conscience. Watching Othello is terrifying because his conscience isn't dead at all. It is actively weaponized against the innocent.
The battlefield is the conscience. And because these plays are essentially battles fought through internal monologues and whispers and lies and subtle suggestions, the sources make a brilliant point about the medium used to tell them.
The audio format.
Yes. There is an ideal medium to experience this kind of psychological warfare, one that strips away all the visual distractions of a movie or a modern stage play and focuses entirely on the ear. We are talking about radio, the theater of the mind.
Shakespeare's work translates to audio drama with an uncanny seamlessness. The essay notes that Elizabethan stages at the Globe Theatre had minimal scenery.
Barely anything.
Right. They possessed no elaborate lighting, no CGI, obviously no massive set pieces. So Shakespeare was forced to write for the theater of the mind from the very beginning. He relied entirely on the architecture of language to paint the environment.
When a radio actor delivers a line like, "The night is thick with thunder," the listener's imagination instantly supplies the storm, the humidity, the impending dread. You don't need a rain machine.
Exactly.
The rhythm of the language, that iambic pentameter which mimics the natural heartbeat, it just carries the entire weight of the physical world.
Let's examine how this translates practically in the NBC Great Plays and Suspense transcripts from our stack. The Great Plays broadcast provides incredible historical context from commentator Burns Mantle. He notes that Othello was written around 1603.
This was a remarkably somber period for Shakespeare, wasn't it?
It was. His patron and friend had died. The political situation in England was highly unstable following the death of Queen Elizabeth, with James of Scotland taking the throne.
A lot of anxiety in the air.
Very much so. Mantle points out that Shakespeare herself had been too melancholy to write for a while, but his lead actor, Richard Burbage, desperately needed a new play for the company. So Shakespeare digs up a plot from an Italian novel called Un Capitano Moro.
And the original Italian story is almost laughable in its simplicity, right?
It really is. It is a very flat, moralistic, cautionary tale. It essentially warns young Italian women not to marry against their parents' wishes, and specifically to avoid men whom nature, heaven, and manner of life have separated from us.
Wow.
Yeah, it is xenophobic and shallow.
But Shakespeare strips away that insulting, simplistic, moral framework. He keeps the bare bones of the plot and drapes his imperishable poetry over it, elevating it into this complex tragedy about human frailty.
It's a complete transformation.
And in the audio adaptations, particularly the suspense broadcast featuring Richard Widmark as Iago and Elliot Lewis as Othello, we see how perfectly that complex tragedy fits the microphone. Iago's primary weapon is not physical violence, it is language.
Yes. On a physical stage or in a cinematic adaptation, a villain often conveys their intent visually. A smirk, a raised eyebrow, a lingering glance at the audience.
Right, you can see them plotting.
Exactly, but in the audio medium, you lose all of that. The visual cues are entirely replaced by pacing, inflection, and the agonizing weight of a carefully chosen pause.
The transcripts show this perfectly in the pivotal temptation scene. There is a moment where Iago and Othello are walking, and they see Cassio hastily leaving Desdemona's side. Iago doesn't make a grand accusation.
He doesn't need to.
No, he just mutters, "Ha! Not that. It's so casual."
And when Othello asks, "What dost thou say?" Iago immediately retreats. He says, "Nothing, my lord," or "if I know not what." It is a masterclass in psychological manipulation.
He's playing him like a fiddle.
He really is. He drops a single drop of poison and then pulls his hand back, forcing Othello to lean forward and demand more.
It reminds me of C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, where the senior demon teaches the junior demon that the best way to corrupt a soul isn't through grand, terrifying spectacles, but through tiny, persistent whispers in the ear.
That's a perfect comparison.
Listening to Richard Widmark's Intense Iago on radio forces you, the listener, to hear the lies exactly as Othello hears them. You don't get the comforting distance of seeing Iago wink at the camera. You are right there with Othello. Does stripping away the visual sets actually make us more empathetic to Othello's gullibility? Because we are trapped in the dark with him.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the lack of visuals creates a profound psychological claustrophobia for the listener. When you listen to a radio play with headphones on, the voices are literally inside your head.
It's a very intimate medium.
It is. You are experiencing the intimate corruption of Othello's mind in real time. You hear Iago's voice whispering in the darkness, nurturing the green-eyed monster of jealousy. Because you cannot look away to the scenery or the costumes, you become vulnerable to the exact same oppressive atmosphere that Othello is drowning in.
You are locked in a room with a gas leak. You can't see the gas, but you are breathing it in with every word. But while faithful adaptations are incredible to listen to, the true testament to Shakespeare's genius, according to the Chesterton Radio Archives, is how easily the skeleton of these plots can be ripped out of the 16th century and transplanted into completely different genres.
Right. We move from the classical Globe Theatre setups to the gritty realm of 20th century pulp radio. These writers took the archetypes of Macbeth and wove them into contemporary, hard-boiled formats.
They just picked them up and moved them.
Yes. They proved that the underlying psychology of temptation doesn't require Elizabethan dialogue to function.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the episode of suspense titled Fire Burn and Cauldron Bubble.
Oh, this one is brilliant.
It is a classic locked room mystery written by the legendary John Dickson Carr. The setup is fantastic. We are at the historic Drury Lane Theatre in London for the opening night of a new production of Macbeth. In a private box sits Marcia Blair, a retired, famous Shakespearean actress, alongside her second husband, Howard White.
And she is paralyzed by fear.
Terrifying.
She has been receiving threatening letters from her first husband, a brilliant but mentally unstable actor named Barry Lake. The letters explicitly promised a horrible death if she ever married Howard.
But there's a catch.
A big one. The logistical problem with this threat is that Barry Lake died in New York a year prior.
So the play begins. The witches chant their famous lines. Howard steps out of the private box to attend to some business, leaving Marcia guarded outside her door by her secretary and a burly ex-wrestler chauffeur.
Pretty tight security.
Yeah. Act 1 ends. The guards open the door to check on Marcia, and she is dead. She is slumped over the railing. But she wasn't shot. She was stabbed straight through the eye with a thin, incredibly sharp blade. Yet the guards swear no one entered the room, and there is no weapon in the box.
It presents the illusion of a physical impossibility. A crime committed by a ghost, fulfilling a supernatural threat entirely in keeping with the dark, mystical themes of the play she was watching. It feels like the curse of Macbeth made manifest.
But the truth, as Carr eventually reveals, is utterly mechanical and driven by the oldest human sin: greed. It wasn't a phantom. It was her new husband, Howard.
Of course it was the husband.
Always is, right? His businesses were failing, Marcia controlled the money, and she was stingy. He forged the threatening letters to frame a dead man. The mechanism of the murder is twisted.
That's so inventive.
Before he left the box, he gave her an anniversary gift, a pair of custom opera glasses. Marcia was incredibly vain and refused to wear regular glasses despite being nearsighted. Howard procured opera glasses invented by a French criminal. When you lift them to your eyes and twist the center focus wheel, it triggers a spring-loaded blade that strikes instantly.
Horrifying.
The glasses then tumble from her face over the railing into the empty box below, where an accomplice scoops them up and vanishes.
It is a meticulously constructed mystery. But what warrants our attention is how John Dickson Carr uses the cultural backdrop of Macbeth. The supernatural elements of the play, the witches, the ghosts, the palpable sense of impending doom, are hijacked by the murderer to serve as a psychological smokescreen.
Right. So do these modern pulp writers view Shakespeare's ghosts and witches as literal magic, or are they treating them merely as early psychological metaphors for a guilty conscience and human depravity?
The Substack essay makes a brilliant connection here, arguing that Carr is demonstrating a fundamental truth about Shakespeare. The real villain is rarely the supernatural. The real villain is human ambition standing quietly in the wings.
Well, that's good, standing quietly in the wings.
Right. In Macbeth, the witches do not force Macbeth to lift the dagger. They merely articulate his deeply hidden pre-existing desires. The magic is just a mirror reflecting human evil. In Carr's mystery, the ghost of the first husband is just a narrative tool wielded by the greedy second husband. Authors like Dorothy L. Sayers and G.K. Chesterton constantly emphasize this in their own detective fiction. The true horror always emanates from the mundane, terrifying reality of human free will.
Which brings us to perhaps the most bizarre, yet oddly profound story in our entire stack of transcripts, an episode from the CBS Radio Mystery Theater titled Lady Macbeth at the Zoo.
It utilizes a narrative perspective that is, frankly, astounding for a crime thriller.
The protagonist is an anthropoid ape named Waldo. Waldo lives in a cage at the Bronx Zoo with his mate, Edna. The conceptual leap here is that Waldo is highly intelligent. He completely understands human speech.
He's basically a human mind in an ape's body.
Yes, he grasps abstract concepts like justice, morality, and the sanctity of life. But he lacks the biological apparatus to speak. He can only grunt, pace his cage, and swing on his trapeze for the tourists.
He is trapped in a state of hyper-aware impotence. And from his cage, Waldo overhears a human couple, Carl and Martha, standing at the railing, casually plotting a murder.
Carl's uncle Webster possesses a $3 million estate. Carl is hesitant to kill him. He is weak, anxious, and vacillating. But Martha steps seamlessly into the role of Lady Macbeth.
She doesn't hold back.
Not at all. She ruthlessly questions Carl's manhood. She tells him he has to nerve himself up to take what is rightfully theirs. She lays out the logistical plan right in front of the ape. Sneak in, steal the uncle's custom-made Hanley Parrish revolver while he sleeps, shoot him, ransack the house to mimic a burglary, and run back to her apartment to establish an alibi.
And Waldo, the so-called dumb beast, is listening to this premeditated evil in absolute horror.
He starts rattling the bars of his cage. He tries desperately to warn the zookeeper, Tom. When Carl looks at the cage, Waldo stares directly into his eyes, trying to project his comprehension.
But Carl just ignores him.
Yeah, Carl just scoffs at the dumb animal. Waldo turns to his mate, Edna, and internally laments, "Life is precious." Murder is their biggest outdoor sport.
We have to pause and look at the profound philosophical irony embedded in this zoo story. The creature designated as the Beast Waldo possesses a highly evolved, almost divine moral conscience. He recognizes the inherent value of life.
Well, the humans don't.
Meanwhile, the civilized humans standing outside the bars, wearing tailored clothes and discussing inheritance laws, are casually plotting the cold-blooded termination of a family member.
It's sickening, really.
It echoes Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, where the intellectual Raskolnikov rationalizes murder for financial gain, stripping away his own humanity in the process. The radio play forces you to ask, who actually belongs in the cage?
It maps perfectly onto the Macbeth dynamic. Carl goes through with it. He kills his uncle. But the moment the blood is spilled, the psychological rot sets in. He can't sleep. He suffers from night terrors, babbling about justice.
Just like Macbeth.
Exactly. Martha, mirroring Lady Macbeth, tells him to shake it off, that it's just his nerves and it will fade. But Carl becomes consumed by a singular paranoid obsession. Waldo the ape knows what he did. Carl's paranoia mirrors Macbeth hallucinating the ghost of Banquo at the banquet. Carl actually sneaks back into the zoo at night with the murder weapon, intending to shoot the ape to tie up the only loose end.
That paranoia becomes his ultimate undoing, as the police apprehend him at the zoo with the stolen murder weapon. The psychological disintegration of Carl is identical to the disintegration of the Scottish king.
Totally identical.
The physical environment shifts from a drafty 11th century castle to a modern New York zoo, but the trajectory of a guilty conscience remains terrifyingly constant.
I love how the source material proves that this adaptability isn't just limited to high society London theaters or urban jungles. The themes of honor, betrayal, and the inescapable weight of guilt are so foundational that they map perfectly onto the raw survivalism of the American frontier. When you strip away the laws of civilization entirely, that guilt becomes even more lethal. Let's look at the frontier adaptations.
The archives provide two excellent examples of frontier Shakespeare. The first is a lighter comedic approach from an episode of The Six Shooter starring James Stewart as the wandering gunman, Britt Ponset.
Oh, this one is so fun. The episode is called More Than Kin. Britt rides into a rough, booming mining town called Virtue City. He runs into some old acquaintances, Arch and Maggie Plunkett. They used to be traveling medicine show hawkers, but they've rebranded themselves as Archibald Plunkett and Marguerite de la Seine.
Very fancy.
Very. They've formed a theatrical troupe to bring high culture to the frontier.
They are attempting to perform Shakespearean tragedy for heavily armed, uneducated miners.
It is a disaster. They attempt to stage Othello, and the miners literally shoot the roof of the theater full of holes. They cancel the rest of the run in terror. But then Britt discovers that the legendary showman P.T. Barnum happens to be passing through town, and Barnum wants to see a play.
Talk about pressure.
Arch and Maggie are desperate for the fame Barnum could provide, so they uncancel their performance of Hamlet. But they know the crowd is going to riot again, so they enlist Britt Ponset.
They force the frontier lawman onto the stage in full costume.
He's supposed to be playing a guard, but he's wearing his trademark six-gun strapped over his Elizabethan tights. The play starts, and immediately the crowd gets rowdy. A drunk miner yells that Arch's acting is terrible and threatens to start a brawl. Britt, right in the middle of the scene, breaks character, steps to the edge of the stage, rests his hand on his gun, and politely tells the crowd they'd better quiet down and enjoy the fine acting.
And it works.
And the threat of imminent violence works. Barnum loves the show, specifically praising Britt's stage presence.
It is a humorous take, but it highlights something vital about the cultural reach of the bard. Even in a dusty, lawless mining camp where disputes are settled with ballistics, the underlying emotional truths of Shakespeare's characters are universally recognized.
But the next frontier story in this stack is deadly serious. It's an episode of Challenge of the Yukon titled Macbeth's Bloody Knife.
A total shift in tone.
Oh, absolutely. It stars the famous Sergeant Preston of the Northwest Mounted Police and his lean dog, King. In the freezing town of Placerville, a man known as Banker Mac is found brutally stabbed to death. A local miner, Fred Malone, is immediately accused because his specific hunting knife is found resting beside the body.
That doesn't look good for Fred.
Not at all. Fred had been overheard arguing violently with Mac earlier that day about a loan. A lynch mob forms in the saloon, ready to drag Fred out and hang him without a trial.
To the mob, it is an open and shut case. The physical evidence is undeniable.
But Sergeant Preston arrives and starts pulling at the threads. He discovers that Fred had been playing cards with two men, Sam and Mike, and Fred has a complete memory blackout after a certain hour.
Very suspicious.
Preston deduces that Fred's drink was drugged. Sam and Mike, it turns out, stole Fred's knife while he was unconscious, used it to murder Banker Mac, and stole a secret gold map and a private ledger. They intentionally planted the bloody knife next to the corpse to frame the innocent man.
The planted bloody dagger. It is a motif pulled directly from the text of Macbeth.
Yes.
After Macbeth murders King Duncan, he is paralyzed by the sight of the blood on his hands and brings the murder weapons back with him. Lady Macbeth scolds him, takes the daggers, and smears the sleeping guards with Duncan's blood to frame them for the crime.
I find this fascinating. We treat Shakespeare as high art today, something you dissect in a university seminar. But wasn't he essentially writing the pop culture thrillers of his day? Is that why his plots fit so seamlessly into a serialized Western or a Mountie detective show?
Without a doubt. Shakespeare did not write for academics. He wrote for the masses, standing in the dirt pit of the Globe Theater. He dealt in stark, primal moral conflicts, greed, premeditated murder, betrayal, and the desperate quest for justice.
Universal themes.
These are the exact currencies of frontier storytelling. Whether you are navigating the foggy Scottish moors or the frozen expanse of the Yukon, the human stakes are identical. The environment is harsh, the law is fragile, and the moral decisions individuals make dictate their survival or their doom.
But whether it's a six-shooter maintaining order on a stage in Virtue City, or a Mountie relying on his dog to sniff out a murderer in the Klondike, all of these adaptations ultimately bring us back to the immense psychological weight of the specific objects and symbols Shakespeare used. He used physical things to anchor his character's descent into madness.
This brings us to a crucial part of our analysis. The transcripts delve deeply into the psychology of those iconic objects, demonstrating how they function not just as props, but as manifestations of the soul's corruption. Let's look at Othello's handkerchief.
It is not just a piece of silk.
No, not at all.
Othello explains its intense, almost mythical history to Desdemona. He tells her it was given to his mother by an Egyptian charmer who could read human thoughts. The charmer prophesied that as long as his mother kept the handkerchief, it would make her amiable and subdue Othello's father entirely to her love.
So it's tied to their whole relationship dynamic.
Yeah, but if she lost it or gave it away, his father's eye would hunt after other women. Othello tells Desdemona there's magic in the web of it. A Sibyl in her prophetic fury sewed the work. The worms were hallowed that did breed the silk.
It is an object imbued with immense generational, emotional, and mystical weight. For Othello, it is the physical embodiment of fidelity and pure love. And what does Iago do with it?
He ruins it.
After Desdemona accidentally drops it to the floor, Iago's wife Emilia picks it up and gives it to Iago. He realizes instantly the weapon he now holds. He says to himself and to the audience, "Trifles light as air are to the jealous confirmations strong as proofs of holy writ."
He plants the handkerchief in Cassio's room. And later, when Othello is losing his mind with suspicion, he physically attacks Iago. He grabs him by the throat and demands ocular proof of his wife's infidelity. He needs to see it.
He's desperate for physical evidence.
Iago, feigning reluctance, casually mentions that he saw Cassio wiping his beard with a handkerchief spotted with strawberries.
That single object, that trifle, is the fulcrum upon which Othello's entire reality tips over into homicidal madness. Iago knows that in the soil of jealousy, a meaningless coincidence blooms into absolute certainty.
Think about how this applies to us today. It's like a modern-day misunderstood text message.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Imagine you see a tiny, insignificant digital artifact, a read receipt left on unread, a vaguely worded email, and out-of-context emoji sent to a coworker. If you are already primed by extreme paranoia and jealousy, your mind spins a massive narrative around that tiny piece of data, and it can completely destroy a relationship or a career.
That is a sharp, terrifying contemporary parallel. The object itself, the handkerchief or the text message, is inherently innocent. The corruption lies entirely in the interpretation forced upon it by the manipulator and accepted by the victim. Now, contrast the physical reality of the handkerchief with the objects that haunt Macbeth.
The hallucinations, the things that aren't even there.
Well, wait, let me rephrase that. The contrast is profound because Macbeth's descent is marked by things that do not exist in the physical world, but are entirely generated by his fractured psyche. Before he even kills Duncan, his conscience projects a warning.
The floating dagger.
Yes, he sees a dagger hovering in the air. He asks, "Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee." He reaches for it, but his hand passes through empty air. Then he begins to see gouts of blood materializing on the phantom blade.
His mind is visually projecting the sin he is about to commit. And it gets worse after the murder. At the royal banquet, surrounded by the lords of Scotland, Macbeth looks at his own throne and sees the battered, bloody ghost of his murdered friend Banquo sitting in his chair.
Right in front of everyone.
He loses his mind in front of everyone, screaming at the ghost, "Thou canst not say I did it. Never shake thy gory locks at me."
And the lords at the table see absolutely nothing. They think the new king is having a neurological fit. The physical world is fine. Macbeth's internal world is a slaughterhouse. And finally, we have Lady Macbeth's iconic sleepwalking scene.
Out damn spot.
Yes, the woman who once told her husband that a little water clears us of this deed is now wandering the halls at night, rubbing her hands together frantically, trying to wash away imagined blood. Out, damn spot. Out, I say. She realizes in the depths of her psychological hell that all the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand.
So if we pull all these threads together, what is the ultimate difference between these two roads to ruin?
This raises the final devastating contrast highlighted by the Chesterton Radio essay. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are haunted by what they have actually done.
The reality of it.
Right. The phantom blood won't wash off because the sin is a historical reality. The guilt is a concrete weight they cannot shed. Their tragedy is the tragedy of a hardened, guilty conscience that eventually breaks under its own crushing mass. Macbeth's evil was invited from within.
But Othello is haunted by what he falsely thinks has been done. The physical handkerchief is real, but the infidelity it represents is a lie. He murders Desdemona to protect his honor from a phantom crime. His tragedy is the tragedy of innocence destroyed by a lie.
In the Great Place transcript, the aftermath of this realization is unbearable. When Othello finally learns the truth, that Iago manipulated his mind and that Desdemona was entirely pure, he looks at the wreckage of his life. He says of himself, "Speak of one that loved not wisely but too well, of one not easily jealous but being wrought perplexed in the extreme, of one whose hand, like the base Indian, threw a pearl away richer than all his tribe."
That's heartbreaking.
He kisses his dead wife and then falls on his own sword, saying, "I kissed thee ere I killed thee. No way but this, killing myself to die upon a kiss."
It's a completely different end than Macbeth's. Macbeth dies swinging his sword on the battlefield in a state of absolute, bleak nihilism, realizing his life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Just utter emptiness.
Othello dies in an agony of regret. Macbeth dies empty. We have covered incredible ground today. We've journeyed from the minimal stages of Elizabethan England to the locked-room mysteries of Drury Lane, from intelligent apes observing human depravity in Bronx zoos to Mounties pursuing justice in the snowy Yukon. We've seen how these archetypes of choosing evil from within, as Macbeth did, and believing evil from without, as Othello did, remain indestructible templates of human vulnerability.
They endure because human nature has not changed since 1603. The specific mechanisms of temptation evolve, but the vulnerability of the conscience remains exactly the same.
I want to leave you, our listener, with a final modern consideration. Think about the era you and I are living in right now. We live in a world saturated with deep fakes, algorithmic echo chambers, and rampant weaponized misinformation.
It's everywhere.
With all of that digital noise swirling around us, are we all becoming dangerously like Othello? We're constantly vulnerable to modern-day Iagos, whispering in our digital ears through our screens, presenting us with false ocular proof designed specifically to stoke our outrage, our jealousy, and our division. It forces us to ask a difficult personal question. How can you protect your own theater of the mind from being corrupted by those who profit from seeing you fall?
That is the exact question these 400-year-old plays demand we ask ourselves every single day.
So, what does this all mean? It means the war of ideas is far from over and the battle for the conscience is still raging. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We've loved bringing the archives of Chesterton Radio straight to your ears. We invite you to continue exploring great stories with us from the little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas. Stay insanely curious, keep questioning the whispers, and we'll catch you next time.